Hello class, I hope you guys are doing well. It's good to see you guys. This week we're actually going to get into our course readings. I know there's been a delay on ordering our book, so what I did was I sent you guys Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. And this is an essay we're going to cover this week. It is a bit long, it's 16 pages total, and the writing is very challenging to understand, but I'm going to annotate some of the key parts for you. And first of all, to begin, one of the themes, our theme in this class is conformity, and we're looking at that. And Henry David Thoreau is a nonconformist. He spent his whole life rebellion. And he wrote this essay because he was angry about the Mexican-American War. He was angry about living in a country that had slavery, and he didn't want to support a government who supported those things. So he rebelled. And this is a very, very famous essay. It inspired Martin Luther King Jr., it inspired Gandhi, it inspired a lot of revolutionaries of our time. And to get started, this 16-page essay, I typed it up actually. If you look at his first quote on the very first page, Henry David Thoreau almost seems like a libertarian, like he wants no government, but that's not what he's asking for. His first quote says, "The government is best which governs least." He's not saying we should get rid of all government. That's more libertarian. What he's arguing is that we should learn how to govern ourselves more. If you really want to see the roots of that, it goes back to Plato, the Republic, philosopher king. We should be able to govern ourselves, and that's what he's asking people to do. Become more knowledgeable, become smarter, stand up for yourself. Govern yourself rather than waiting for people to govern you. That's really the central thesis to his whole essay. Let's see. If we look at page 3, if you look at the handout I provided, it's numbered at the very bottom. Henry David Thoreau is kind of pompous in some areas, and I don't know if he'd be very popular today because he could say some very contentious things. One thing we believe is that if we really want to support our government, we must join the military, but Henry David Thoreau was against that, and I'm summarizing a lot of page 3 at the top. But he's saying that people serve the military, but they fight wars that they don't believe in. And if you're fighting a war you don't believe in while you're in the military, you're not following your true conscience. You're following orders that somebody else is giving you. And he also says that a lot of wars are fought by the poor, and rich men sit on the sidelines. So he has a lot of these ideas in his essay. They're very powerful. They're very strong. They're very controversial as well. Down at the bottom of the page, in the last paragraph, right around the middle, he starts to create this metaphor called the machine, and he compares the government to a machine, and he's going to weave that through this entire essay. Let's see if we get into page 5. A lot of people say that if you want to support the government, vote. And voting matters. We hear this a lot, especially as students. Your vote matters. Your vote counts. But Henry David Thoreau says voting doesn't. I mean, it's great to vote, he says, but it only does so much. He compares it to gambling. Like, you could vote, but you may not get what you want. You're better off running for office or fighting for what you want or protesting for what you want rather than voting, creating change, petitioning. He's saying that's a much stronger way to go about change. He also says something later in the essay. He says, if you really believe in your government, don't run for government. If you're in a position of power that's corrupt, drop out of government. So he has a lot of very radical ideas in this essay. And by the way, I do love this essay. I think it's very powerful, and it really pertains to our world today as well. I love this. Another metaphor he uses on page 6, where he says, if your neighbor steals $1 from you or $10 from you, you're going to be mad. You're going to talk to them. You're going to fight them. Maybe not fight them, but you're going to argue with them. But he says the government steals money from us every day, but we do nothing. We sit around passively. And he's saying we need to stand up and fight against this. Which is a pretty strong metaphor. Down at the bottom of page 6 are some of his, he has a lot of strong lines, very, very famous lines in this essay. You'll hear them a lot. But he's saying that Some of the most just people went to prison. Martin Luther King went to prison. Copernicus went to prison. Um, Martin Luther went to prison. Gandhi went to prison. So he's saying that the world likes to imprison just people. And he also says that the only place for a just man is prison. And I think that's a pretty powerful point as well. And I would say his most famous passage of this entire essay is on page 7, and it is the third paragraph. He says, "If the injustice of the government is part of the necessary friction of the machine, let it go. Let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out." If the government's corrupt, you can't do anything about it. It's gonna run itself then. It's gonna break on its own. But he says, if the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. You never read this. I've never read this in my entire life. He's saying break the law. He's not saying speed, do 90. You got to drive 90 from here on out. He's not saying break laws. He's saying break corrupt laws that are hurting other people. There's a fine line there. It's not about breaking laws that interfere necessarily with your life, but interfere with a lot of other people's life and inflict injustice upon other people. That's what he's saying. So we have to clarify that. But this is a very strong passage, perhaps the strongest passage of his entire essay. I also like this too, because I think a lot of people, they read this essay and they're like, we have to fight everything. We have to fight corruption and all these other things. And I like this. It's in the next paragraph. He says, you have a short life. He says, you can't fight everything. You cannot spend your world fighting everything. You have to choose what you fight for. And if what you're fighting for is you're trying to prevent other people from being abused or hurt, then that's a noble cause. That's worth fighting for. If it really impacts your life personally, then that's something you should fight. But if it's just an inconvenience, there's no need to fight that, is what he's saying. So I like how he backs up a little bit. First he says break the law. He says, but wait. We should be careful about what laws we do break. Let's see. And I said this before, it's probably the strongest quote in an entire essay. It's up there, it's page 8. It's the second paragraph, first sentence. Under a government which imprisons and unjustly, the true place for a just man is prison. Very, very strong point. And like we said, a lot of our social leaders around the world, Nelson Mandela, have spent time in prison. Let's see. The heart of the essay, the whole narrative of this essay is that Henry David Thoreau was arrested because he didn't pay his taxes. He didn't pay poll tax. He was very upset about this. And he didn't want to pay taxes because he didn't want his taxes to go toward a war they didn't believe in. So he protested it and paid taxes for 6 years. And he was arrested and he spent a night in prison. Side note, I believe his aunt bailed him out the next day. It's a little whiny, a little bit over the top here. But he calls the people who, I'm reading paragraph 2 on page 10. He says the people who imprisoned him were underbred. They treated him like a dog. They're terrible people, etc., etc. A little over the top here, but this is what he's saying. And if you look at the next page, in the next couple pages, to summarize it, he's essentially saying that he felt like he paid his taxes more than anybody because he did time for it. And another quote that is here that you'll hear in a lot of political writing is they say, I hear this a lot, when I was in prison, I felt like I was more free than I was on the outside. And there were only certain things they could imprison my body, but they cannot imprison my mind. They cannot imprison my spirit. They cannot imprison my soul. And he has a lot of that type of language here that makes it very, very powerful. And you'll see this in other political writings as well. So these are very powerful passages to take note of. Let's see. As we've watched in other videos, Henry David Thoreau was a transcendentalist. And what transcendentalists believe is that... I think I lost the quote. Oh no, I found it. It's on page 11. He's a transcendentalist, and transcendentalists believe that you have to get back to nature. If you really want to understand yourself, you need to spend time in nature. He wrote a book called Walden that is all about that. We're going to start reading that next week. But here's a very powerful metaphor that relates to nature, and it's on page 11. It's the top paragraph, and it's near the bottom. He says, I perceive that when an acorn and chestnut fall side by side, the one does not remain inert to make way for the other, but both obey their own laws and spring and grow and flourish as best they can, till one, perchance, overshadows and destroys the other. If a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. So he's basically saying when two seeds grow, one tree does not say, hey, I need to scoot over for this tree to grow room. It doesn't work like that. This tree is going to grow to a size, and if this tree has to perish because of it, it's going to do it. Basically, what he's saying is if you don't live by your nature, if you don't stay true to yourself, then your spirit dies. And I think that's a very, very powerful quote. Another one of his probably top 3 most famous quotes in this entire essay. So we covered this essay. We covered a lot of the key details and key points. There's a lot more for you guys to discover and read in this essay. And if you guys have any questions on this essay, you might want to read through it a couple times to really understand it. We don't have an assignment this week, but we will have an essay that will be about Henry David Thoreau, which you might write about this essay, so you'll want to understand it. Thank you guys so much for listening.